Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Today, Mr. Pierre Sinclair, co-author, researcher, and publisher of the book, The Granite Man and the Butterfly, will be entertaining us with the true life story of David Hamel, a UFO abductee. Mr. Sinclair, a scientific researcher for the past 10 years, is much in demand in the field of electronics. His work encompasses various projects, such as a hydrogen-generating cell, which combined with gasoline reduces automobile pollution, a small nuclear decay battery, which produces a low electrical power source for electronic equipment. And most recently, he's been working with David Hamel on a non-polluting electrical energy device which will radically change the world of science. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Pierre Sinclair.
Thank you very much, Charlie. I'm glad that we have so many people today with us. I should start with the idea of energy. What is energy, and do we realize that energy is surrounding us at all time? Now, the point is that the energy that we have been utilizing today is energy that's been formed in such a way as uranium, for example, or we can use oil to create a transfer of energy in different forms. But really, have we really used the energy that surrounds us at time? Now, if I may here, I'd like to explain a little bit of what energy is. Energy is light from the sun. Energy is heat from the surrounding air and the heat created by the sun. Energy is matter. This is energy. Now, how can it be energy? Well, the atoms that forms the molecules that forms this podium here are continuously working to keep the shape of what it is, really. And so all of this is full of energy as well. We just haven't found a way to take this piece of wood there and transfer it into something that would be beneficial to us. So today, what I'd like to do is tell you about a man that have come up with such a device that utilizes surrounding energy and creates potential, helpful, and clean, pollution-free energy that we could use on a day-to-day basis. The man name is David Hamel. And David Hamel is, we talk about David Hamel in this book here, The Granite Man and the Butterfly, a book that I have researched for the last 5 years and co-authored with Gene Manning, the writer of the book. And what we're trying to do here is basically tell what this man has gotten as far as the technology, where he got the technology, and also its potential today. And we're going to expand as well on telling you who are the scientists today that actually have come up with devices that produces these effects, and their way of doing it, and David Hamel's way of doing it. And so I'd like to start with my first slide here to introduce you David Hamel. Now this is David Hamel. Mr. Hamel lived in Maple Ridge from 1950 to about 1980. And he's a carpenter. He's just a simple man like you and me, and had absolutely no technological background. So what David did is just went around and worked from people to people to make some money to live with his wife, Nora, which is quadriplegic, and also has been taking care of her till today. David is still alive and is 70 years old today, and working with me on the new prototype we're trying to put together to demonstrate these famous unusual effects and this unusual potential for energy. We'll move on to the next slide here. This is David Hamel in 1944 when he went and fight the war for us. I'd like to talk a little bit about this one here because what David did is that he went to Dieppe and fought the war there on the beach and then got captured by the Germans and also was put into a camp. Now, as David was asked to do labor for the Germans, he went to Dresden where the city was bombed, and as he was picking up the dead bodies for the Germans, the bombers in the sky was of course catching his attention. As he looked up in the sky, David was exposed to his first UFO sighting, and this is 1944. It's pretty impressive. There was 5 lights on top of the bombers and a straight line formation, And David looked at them thinking that they were general war planes. They were just on top of the bombers, and he says, well, maybe they're observing the war. And so he didn't think about it anymore. But the formations changed from a straight line to a V formation. Interesting enough about this fact is that most of the UFO sightings that we hear about are kind of like that. When there's more than 4 UFOs, formations seem to be changing continuously, and then they disappear. David didn't think anything of it after, and then went back to the camp. He also escaped after that, and that is a long story, but a very interesting story of how he escaped and how he helped us in saving or ending this war. This is explained in the book as well, and we're going to move on here to the next slide. This is David's wife, Nora. She also have a little bit of a importance in this story because Nora comes a little bit later and is also part of the phenomena that surrounds the information that David has gotten in regard to this new energy device. This is David's house in Maple Ridge. This is a picture taken in 1980. And you can see just a small little house. And at the end of that house there, you can see a little extension, a little garage. That's where David would perform his experiments. Now, before I move on to the next slide, I'd like to tell a little bit of how David has gotten the information that we are talking about here. This I am doing because I think it's important to know why he got that information, where he got it from, and also why there are scientists today doing the same thing, correlating with the information that David has gotten. David was abducted in October 21st, 1975 by a UFO. When they took him up there, they told him that the only reason why they were taking him up there is that he would take the dimensions and all the information required to build again the propulsion engine that was in the ship that he had just gotten in. He didn't understand at the time what the propulsion was, but he was sure interested by all the light that he could see inside the ship and also the rumbling sound that he could hear continuously. They had told David, well, look, David, if you want to find out how it works, you can take the dimension. That means you can be in any size that you want, and you can go between the cones that forms this ship and can really see how it works. That's why you're here, so that when you go back home, then you can rebuild this ship. As this is happening, they fly back to Ontario, Gilmore, Ontario. They hovered on top of a creek and siphoned some water from the creek. As they did so, they wanted to show David into some type of a lab where there were all types of glass pipes and so forth with different filters, what was in our water, mercury and all types of debris. And they said that you guys have to work on that because it's killing your planet. Another message maybe of green, but I think it's an important factor because he tell that they told him that our water was polluted. This was in 1975. That was way then. As they take him back to Maple Ridge, David comes back in his body, and I should specify here that David, when he went in the spaceship, was in a spiritual body, really, where his body had fell asleep in front of the television at night, and basically his spirit went up in the flying saucer, and a very good reason for doing so was that it was the only way that David could go between the cones and really see what was going on. As David comes back to his body, absolutely flabbergasted by what he had seen, all he wanted to do is duplicate what the information was inside the ship, therefore building these machines. Telling his wife and then the woman at the coffee that he used to go at all time, nobody would believe him because the story was so fantastic. But David's drive was absolutely necessary to this story because to him, the only thing he wanted to do from now on was to build this ship. So the first thing David does, he goes to the bank and then sit at the bank there and wait for some money that he wanted to borrow so they could buy some magnets to rebuild what he had seen. So waiting at the bank, folding his hand, he found in the palm of his hand under the upper layer of skin a black dot. As he reaches out for his knife, his pocket knife, he scratches the top of the black dot and realized that there was a 1-inch square piece of plastic with something imprinted on it. As he takes it up to the light and looks at it, he realizes that there was something actually showing through this piece of plastic. This is the actual microfilm that was blown up from the piece of plastic he found in his hand. This was in 1975. A, microfilms are pretty hard to come by then. B, pretty hard to find them. Could you pause? Thank you very much. B, it's pretty hard to find them under your skin for any particular reason. And C, what I did is I took the actual blow-up of the negative to a lab and got it analyzed. What I asked the man, I said, could you tell me whether this negative is an actual blow-up of a microfilm? And he says, Pierre, yes, it was. So now I know for a fact that at least the picture appearing here is an actual microfilm picture. I did not say that this microfilm was actually found under his skin. That's what he says. But what I can say is based on the information and analysis of this piece of film, this was a microfilm, a blow-up of microfilm, as he says. The picture that you see here is important because the microfilm was embedded in his hand for a very good reason. The reason was that he could remember what he had seen. For example, 3 points here. The light around the ship. David says that he could see the light around the ship and inside the ship being produced continuously. The portholes around the ship here. Now these portholes are very important because he says that the way the cones were moving is because there was an airflow coming in and being controlled at these inputs so that the cones would wobble more or less. This also will help in directional movement. C, this seemingly flowing air inside of the ship. David tells very well that it's important for the air to flow in the middle of the ship and the outer rim of the ship. What you see there is that the air seems to be flowing around the ship, and in David's actual prototypes, he says that the actual flow is inside here and also flows on the very top of the device. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, we'll look at this one closely. Based on the information that David had gotten in the ship, all it says that if you take the magnetic field, and when they told him, when he asked, well, what do you mean by magnetic field? He says, the same one that you have on Earth. He says, when you take this magnetic field and you oppose this magnetic field at different angles in movement, you will create this light that you saw. So David, right away, picked up a 45-gallon drum and started to put these cones inside. Inside the ship, what it was, really, is 4 cones. One upper cone, which is the shell, the lower cone, which is part of the shell as well, and 2 moving cones in the center. These 2 moving cones, which we'll see a little bit later, are part of the actual energy device. As the cone moves, and these magnets here, so imagine that this is a cut view of the actual 45-gallon drum. What you have in here is basically magnets all around the rim so that this cone is actually a round cone with a rim of magnet all around it. And at the end there, on the outside, this rim of magnet would repel this one here. So what you have is like some type, of a magnetic bearing. He would do the same thing here and there again. And why 3? Because it's very important. The way these cones actually fall, this one would fall this direction, this one falls in this direction, and this one wants to move in this direction. The pin that you see there was practically a nail. And you would have a second nail in here and another nail in there, so that would create the actual distance between these cones. At the very top of that cone there, you have a magnet. Now, if you see on my display there, you'll see about the size of magnet that he had there. And this magnet was attached to the upper cone. On the very top of that 45-gallon drum, what he had there is a cap or the lid, and attached to that another magnet of the same size, repelling this one here. Now, David had people coming over and also people from universities and saying, well, look, David, it looks like you got some